said when I was thinking about what I was going to say today, I said, okay, I'll open up the newspaper and I'll see what happened yesterday. One thing that happened is just, seriously, it's just random. I look and you see that OPEC, which is the international oil cartel, decided it was going to keep its quotas constant, which had the effect of lowering oil prices to $69 a barrel. Now, we economists, we sit there and we look, okay, look at this. It's all about supply and demand, right? That's what's happening. And its expectations are that prices are going to fall, so they fall right away, right? So it's about supply and demand. But it also has a very important implication for macroeconomics as well, because a lot of countries depend on their exports of oil. A lot of them import their oil, and so that's going to influence the trade balance. It's going to be important for exchange rates. I can look at the value of the dollar, but my guess is the dollar got a bit weaker. It got a bit weaker because all these oil contracts are denominated in dollars, right? And so prices go down, that could have effect. So you've got this economic effect, which is very important, but you've got a very strong political effect. These oil prices are strongly influenced by what's going on, for example, in Russia and Ukraine, or what's going on in Iraq at this point, or elsewhere. Okay, so we've got this dimension, this dimension of, if you will, international relations from that point of view. But then we also have the problem of coordination. I mean, in economics, I can tell you that it's always tough to bring a cartel together, because we all know that OPEC sets quotas, but rarely are they found, because you get a lot of people cheating. Right? So from a theoretical point of view, you can look at it. This is more kind of game theory from an international relations point of view, is very important and very interesting. Also, obviously, history is going to play a big role in what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on with respect to oil prices and these sorts of things. You can draw a historical dimension, which is important. So at SAIS, we think it is really important to have strong tools that are rooted in, traditional areas, but that we can bring to bear on analyzing all of these issues. What this does is not only does it provide you the foundation to look at these issues in international affairs, but it also establishes a strong identity of SAIS. When you go on the job market, if you went to SAIS, this brings up an image of you. Right? And when I was at the OECD, for example, you said this person was interviewing, they went to SAIS, all of a sudden everybody has in mind that this is somebody who's got a strong background in economics, has a good knowledge of international relations and politics, and with some historical background. So they've got a good foundation because of the way we approach our studies. Allows you to prepare for a wide variety of different careers. We have students that go, I have students, former students, that are working in the field in Africa, and I have a lot of them that are working on Wall Street or the City of London. They're able to go in a lot of directions, and they're able to mold the their program based on what they want to do in the future. And so this isn't something about, it's not just about preparing you to get out there and get the job market and get that first job and then you're done. We're trying to give you the foundations that are going to last you a lifetime. And that's ultimately our goal.
Now, how do you solve problems? That's a real question. Well, the way you solve problems is not by plowing the same furrow day after day after day. So this is why we do that interdisciplinary work. We do interdisciplinary work because usually problems don't arise within disciplines. Usually problems arise across disciplines, or they just arise, to be perfectly honest, and the disciplines are relatively irrelevant to the problem itself, but they offer you different tools that you can use to address them. So what do we mean by that? I guess the best way to do that would be to give you an illustration. How many of you have noticed that the European economy has not been doing very well recently? A tricky situation. And usually when you face a tricky situation like that, what you've got to do is try to figure out what caused the problem in the first place, right? So let me get a show of hands. How many of you think that the problem that is stymieing the European economy, that's dragging down the European economy, comes from the United States, and it's all America's fault? That is the official line of the European Commission, right? That this crisis originated in the United States, right? And once it came to Europe, right, then it caused all kinds of bad things that we weren't ready to handle, but the ultimate responsibility is America's. We'll have to get back to why that's the case. So, okay, that's one theory. Another theory could be that this is a problem that's caused by the single currency. Because a lot of people right now are arguing that by creating a single currency, we actually laid the foundations for this terrible crisis, right? That sounds like a bad thing to me. It doesn't sound like a good thing, right? So how many of you believe that the euro is ultimately responsible? So, and then we've got a third hypothesis, which is that it's actually not the Americans, it's not the euro, it's the trade unions and their obsessive devotion to job security, right? Things like Articolo 18, which is Article 18 here in Italy, right? The very controversial protection that workers have. Is it the trade unions that are to blame, these terrible people who keep calling general strikes for no particular reason, right? In order to protect legislation that prevents us from flexibly responding or responding flexibly, depending on how you want to use your grammar, right? So in that context, is it the trade unions who are to blame? Because there are a lot of people who believe that. But we could also make this easier. What if we just blame it on the Greeks? Right? Nobody understands them anyway, right? So why don't we just point the finger at them, right? Is it the Greeks that did this to us, or maybe we could lump them together with the Italians and the Spanish and the Portuguese, right? These peripheral countries, are they to blame? Okay, there's a last possibility, which is that it could actually be the way we put together the internal market, right? The cornerstone of European integration is the internal market. It's a set of rules that allow us to trade freely across country, including trading financial services. Could it be that when we designed the internal market, we actually made a mistake, underestimated the impact of the free flow of financial services on the stability of national economies? What if that's the reason? So one of the big projects that we've had developing in the European and Eurasian studies over the last 4 years has been developing an argument that will help us to explain how a design flaw, not in the single currency, but in the single market, in the most important achievement of European integration, has actually created a vulnerability that we can easily address. A vulnerability that will not only make the current crisis go away, but also prevent it from recurring. So this project actually culminated last Monday with a document that we created, which is called the Theory of Optimum Financial Areas. It was a document that developed not just out of me as an academic, but out of my interaction with colleagues and with students. Because without students, we never really get the good ideas that we need in order to achieve real solutions to the real problems that we face. And it's a story that involves not just contemporary analysis, but we had to do a lot of history. We had to look at financial market integration inside the United Kingdom in the period that started at the end of the 18th century. We had to compare that to financial integration in the United States and Canada, so to add this comparative dimension. We had to update the story to include the transatlantic relationship and to focus on European integration today. And the academic difference of size is that we equipped you to do all of those things, to do history, to do economics, to do contemporary analysis, to solve problems that make the world a better place.
Until a few years ago, before the financial crisis started, so if you go back to until 2007, we would have given a much different narrative of which were the policy priorities and what was useful or interesting to study for people that are considering a master such as the one size. That has been a big shift in the focus of policy, and in particular the perspective that you have in economics. So we have discovered that there has been a resurgence, a renaissance of international economics and the interest for international economics. Because we have discovered a very tight interaction between the behavior of the economies, employment, so jobs, growth at the domestic level, and what happens at the international level. So now we have a school which is in a unique position, SAIS, which has it's the only school of international relations with a truly global presence, and in particular a presence on both sides of this world phenomenon, of this world crisis, on the US side and the European side. And as Europe is dealing with its economic and political problems, there is a discussion of possibly the most important trade and investment agreement in recent history that keeps together, or may keep together, both sides of the Atlantic. Europe on one side and North America on the other side. They TTIP. Now, the future of that agreement is uncertain. But still, once again, upsize, you are in that unique spot. You have that unique advantage of being able, once again, to be in a school that has a perspective that at least entails both sides of the Atlantic.
Let me start off by being a little provocative. I see our job, or my job, is not to make the world a better place. I mean, not to make it a worse place. I'd like to make it a better place, but that's not my job. Nor to rescue voters from the populist temptation, be it Farage or Cinque Stelle or any other form. My job in American foreign policy is to help us all, myself included, better understand the world as it is in its frustrating complexity, in order to then proceed to what we want to do. If you want to make the world a better place, you're better equipped to do so. American foreign policy is not the world. There's the world, there's American foreign policy. It relates to the world, but it's not the world. It's the world from an American perspective. It's rooted, one hopes, on American values and American Constitution. Our job in American foreign policy is to help you understand that a little better, and to help maybe join the argument yourself and debate some of these questions. In order to understand American foreign policy, you have to go into a little bit of history. In fact, Professor Harper and I, who teach this course at different semesters, try to smuggle in even the 19th century, because it's kind of hard to understand America's interests without understanding how they became America's interests. And if you excavate the archaeology far enough, you see that some things which are now doctrine, certainty, exceptionalism, were actually choices that were made and debated at a certain time. And since history is a flow, those debates maybe have to be revisited, and we try and equip you to do that.
Obviously, history is really not very useful for people who want to make a career in international relations. Somebody might say, what is the point of studying history at all? Aren't we better off doing practical courses that gives us real knowledge that we can implement in our jobs, and also do a lot of economics? Yeah, the issue though of doing history is crucial. April last year, Foreign Policy magazine does a poll of 3,500 practitioners, diplomats, people working for think tanks, people working for foundations around the world. What is the best discipline for somebody who's going to be a practitioner in international relations? Of course, everybody assumed it would be economics or law or political science. Instead, the triumphal winner, as any historian could have predicted, was history. Why did history win this poll? Why is history so useful for people who want to work in international relations? International relations is a discipline, or you could argue a collection of disciplines. In a sense, it's also a profession. You're hoping to become international relations professionals. Why is it knowing history useful to people who want to become international relations professionals? Well, certainly if you go to work in the field of politics, politics is current history, current issues, current crises, current questions upon which you might be asked to give a judgment or an opinion or write a 10-page paper which will change the foreign policy of your country, they spring from historical roots, and they require historical knowledge and historical understanding in order for people who are practitioners and policymakers to be able to understand the crises and to make recommendations. You need analysts who know history. So first reason why history is useful. Second, history is about complexity, right? At the risk now of irritating my two colleagues here, economists reduce everything to money. International relations reduce everything to power. Historians say, hey, wait a minute, it's more complex than that. Came from previous class, I was talking about the crisis in the Congo. when Congo became independent. I teach a course called The End of European Imperialism. Okay, first of all, actually, Congo is arguably the most problematic country in the world. How many of you know that there's been a war going on since the 1990s that has killed nearly 5 million people? It's rather a lot of people. It's the biggest war since World War II, right? The roots of that conflict are historical. They lie in Belgian colonialism. They lie in the way the Belgians went out of that country. They lie in the way the crisis that followed Belgian decolonisation became a Cold War crisis, etc., etc. Studying those crises, studying case studies in international relations enables one, in my opinion, to be a better judge subsequently of ongoing current events.